Guys, welcome back to Spank Ranch Garage. We got this John Deere 350C bulldozer here. We got running a couple episodes ago, but it runs really crappy. Down on power, popping out the exhaust, very slow to rev. We believe there's some fuel system issues going on, maybe some valve train issues going on. So let's get into it. A couple of viewers were very dissatisfied that I did not check the valves in the first episode. I'm sorry guys, but everybody works in a little different order, and that's just how things go. So I'm not neglecting valves. They are on the radar, but being that I'm already privy to a fuel system failure, obviously I'm going to be focusing my troubleshooting more in that direction. Pretty spotless under there. That's good news. This is our timing pin and our timing window here to set top dead center. So now, unfortunately, I just sit here with a little pry bar and move the flywheel one tooth at a time until we get all the way back to top dead center. And then, knowing my luck, the first top dead center I find will be 180 out on the pump. We'll have to go all the way around. It's time consuming. Alright, I know I'm close, but I haven't dropped the pin into the hole yet. Let's see what the Roosa Master says about that. Alright, so I finally got top dead center on power stroke, and you can see those two lines there between the cam and the weight basket. They're slightly off, so the static timing of the pump is a little bit off. Essentially, you'd have to take the body and roll it in towards the block just a smidge, but honestly, you know, that's probably, I don't know, 1 degree maybe. That ain't our problem, just something I wanted to note before taking it apart. We are at top dead center. Didn't measure the valves yet, but they have play. They're not stuck open. So we need 14 thousandths on the intake and 18 on the exhaust. They're both about 2 or 3 thousandths tight, but I don't think that, I mean, I'm obviously gonna fix that, but I don't believe that is our running issue. Yeah, I mean, you still got 14 thousandths of gap on most of these, so easily. I want to get ready to pull this pump. Also want to take a peek under the cover here and see how things look. Curious if we're going to find a bunch of coffee grinds and crap in here, or has it all flushed through and it's clean. I mean, I was running it without the return check ball in it, so it may have pushed everything back to the tank by now. It was pretty clean under the timing cover. Kind of surprised to see that. Oh yeah, quite a bit of schmoo in here. Oh wow, yeah, it's almost like that whole area down here is just clogged. Well, anyway, we're pulling it apart and rebuilding it anyway, so it doesn't matter. Alright, this thing is pretty well ready to come out at this point. Fuel lines are out of the way, the linkage is off, wires are off. Should be ready to pull it out. Now what I'm expecting is the drive shaft will be staying in the engine and the seals will roll out of the pump and it'll just stay there. I'd like to have the drive shaft out too, but there's not a lot of benefit other than I was going to set up like a little pump station to test this thing on the bench. But that's probably not going to happen. Oh, that one's going to be fun. Sometimes a universal on a crow's foot might be what you need. Oh. So that bolt looks very tight and that just slipped. That's nice. I actually got it to break loose. That's huge. Everyone's like, oh, I don't want to work on new stuff. It's so hard to work on. Well, this ain't great either, and this is 50 years old. Man, that was a pain in the butt. Well, we should be home free now. I've never used a crow's foot in that fashion before, but it did do the job. Alright, let's see what happens. Alright, so our shaft stays in on this model. I'm taking a look at these cup seals. See if it looks compromised. I mean, it wasn't rolled. I kind of expected it to come out like this and be flipped. But I don't see any rips or tears on it, because this is where I believe we're getting fuel into our crankcase. We'll keep that in mind. I think what we're going to see is that the inside pilot bushing of the pump is going to be really scored up. I can see it from here, I can feel it, but we'll get into that when we get it taken apart. Alright, so I'm just building a quick fixture here to hold this injection pump while I work on it. And if this was going to be a one-time deal for me, I probably wouldn't bother, but being that I have 3 John Deeres with Roosa Masters on them, chances are likely this ain't the first and last time I'm going to be doing this. So that's the idea. Now I can work on these crusty Roosa Masters without them rolling all over the bench. And she is crusty. All right, now let me say real quick before all the comments start blowing up, why aren't you sending this to a fuel shop? I don't want to do that unless I absolutely have to. I'm going to have to learn how to do this someday anyway, so why not start now? Another reason is this pump is generally unmolested, so your RPM advance or your fuel timing advance here still has an original seal on it. Your max torque still has an original seal on it. Your high idle, low idle is still sealed. So I have reason to believe that this pump hasn't been screwed with yet. So assuming I just disassemble this, replace seals, replace the governor cage, all that stuff, and put it back together as I found it, this shouldn't need recalibration. 2, really the only calibration that I really care about on these pumps is case pressure and fuel advance. And both of those I can work with tools that I already have, essentially. I'd like to make a clear polycarbonate window for the timing check here so I can run this thing and see what the cage and the cam are doing. So if I had to do some tuning on the advance, I can. We have all the factory specs in the manual and in the Roosa Master manual. Otherwise, we can set our pressure for our charge pump. And max fuel, who cares? I mean, worst case, it smokes under full load. You back it off until it runs the way you want. So I don't think this is rocket science. I know there's guys that throw this on their tailgate and rebuild it in 2 hours and throw it back on the machine and never have a problem. Now, if you get in here and you get one that's already been screwed with and people have changed all kinds of stuff, then you might want to send it somewhere that has a pump stand to actually recalibrate the unit. But I think in this case, I have no intentions of that. I'm pretty sure this is going to go smooth, but I'm learning every day, so we'll figure it out. SM2045, that's the John Deere Roosa Master manual. You'll see reference to this in all your service manuals. They don't actually put pump rebuild information in there. They will put pump specs though. So what your total timing looks like, high idle, what your total timing looks like, high load, high idle. They may or may not put injector information in there. So like this manual's old. This is printed in like 74. This dozer's newer than that. So technically this pump number doesn't exist in this manual. But between this and the service manual for that dozer, we have all the information we need to do it. So I'm not going to read this thing to you, but it's good to actually go through the theory of operation to understand how this pump works, and then kind of use the manual to guide you through disassembly and inspecting everything. So that is for me to handle out here with a couple cold sodas and get my head all wrapped around it. I can give a quick briefing on what I understand about these pumps. So starting at the back here, you've got your fuel inlet, and now you've got a standard vane pump under here. And that works kind of like an air tool or any other vane pump you've seen. It's just a disc with vanes that come out, and they basically force fluid through this casing here. There is a regulator for that, and that determines what your pressure is inside this case. Now, inside here is where more of the actual diesel fuel injection happens. You've got a thing with rollers on it and a spring, and basically they ride around an external cam, and that's what actually squeezes the fuel to push it towards the center of this. And then you've got this distribution head here, which is turning with the main drive shaft. So this is a 3-cylinder. It's only got 3 ports on it. Essentially, that allows fuel to flow to the injector, and then as it rotates, it blocks the hole. Fuel builds up again, and then shoots to the next injector. Now, the advanced portion of this is kind of cool. So the case pressure increases with RPM due to just having higher speed from that. You could call it a lift pump. It will actually lift, and it does produce pressure for this entire body. But as that happens, that fuel is pushing on a hydraulic piston in this area here, which actually rotates the entire cam to advance or retard your timing. And that's pushing against a spring. There is other things going on in here like air removal. So there's a bleed valve back here somewhere, I believe, that allows some of that case pressure to escape and come up into the governor assembly here and then out that return valve that we saw. And that's got the glass ball in it that keeps clogging. You've got to get your case pressure correct, and then your timing kind of runs off of that. So if case pressure is to spec but timing isn't, you would adjust here. But if case pressure isn't right, then don't even bother touching timing, that kind of thing, until you get that all figured out. That's my brief understanding of this. I'm sure I'll understand it better as we pull it apart. I do want to understand the root cause of why this thing runs so crappy, so let's dig into it and see what we find. Alright, now I want to be clear, this is not a how-to video. I don't know how to, so I'm not showing you how, but I'm going to show you my journey of dealing with this, and you can use it to learn to do better on yours. Probably should have pulled that first, but no harm there. There's a lot of varnish and crap up in this housing. How do we disengage from the metering arm? I see. Pull forward like this. Okay. So it's the governor arm pivot. I think that should pull straight out. Okay. A lot of shmoo. Now we should be able to lift this arm out. Like that, also shmooed up. So now we can pull the metering valve and spring, apparently. Okay. There's the spring. Got to be a little careful with the manual. I was reading back a step and it was like, oh, you know, pull the metering valve out and remove the head locking screws if not already removed. And they're in the corner of this little black and white picture. You can hardly see what you're looking at. So it's good to read these steps a couple times. We're cutting wires. We're getting into her now. Warranty's gone. Now my goal here would be to remove this as an entire assembly without ever touching the calibration. I think the pump is designed to support that type of work. All right, hold on, little buddy. Inch and an eighth. Pretty crusty, not what I'd love to see, but is there a hole in this? I expect there to be a hole in this, but maybe not. And there's the hole. So yeah, this would see case pressure through this hole, which will cause this piston to expand. I would think. Maybe. I don't know. We'll see when we get in there. And this one I would expect to just be a spring, just a mechanical piston. Or maybe this is the one that sees oil pressure. Okay. Alright, so this one actually sees oil between the O-rings here. And it seems to be locked up, which would explain some timing issues. So it looks like as you adjust in on the spring, you're actually reducing advance, potentially. But, like I said, I got no idea. Alright, cool. I can feel the ring moving in here. That's cool. Like working on a Yamaha. So if you guys can see inside there, you see that pin moving back and forth? That's your timing advance right there. And those pistons oppose each other and fight. And based on case pressure and the spring tension, will turn the cam to either advance or retard timing. Now also, this is not a standard hex bolt. You could jam a Torx in there, but there is a special tool for it. I was able to track that down, and I have that. If you guys need that, let me know. I can tell you where to get it. Most of the Standardine tools, Roosa Master tools, are discontinued, but there's a company that still sells this wrench. This looks like an Allen wrench, but it's actually a spline wrench. Forget what they're called, but pretty interesting little spline design. They're used in radio, like ham radio stuff is where I ended up getting this. See if we can get this out without breaking it. Oh, that's a little concerning, but she broke loose. And there it is. So that's like a ball joint. You can see the witness marks of where the two pistons ride on it. That's what forces the cam back and forth. Pretty cool design. Head locating screw. So this thing is ported. It's got a hole in it between O-rings there and a hole in the end. Not exactly sure of the function, but I will figure that out. All right, now we can start to pull the head out. They say, with a slight rotating motion. Oh, there we go. Now that's kind of funny, and I'll explain why later. But the governor cage came out in two pieces, and this was what I expected would be our issue, so that's kind of funny. I guess it's funny. But at least we understand our root cause of the pump problems. That's not supposed to be like that. This is the governor of the pump, and you have weights in here that are centrifugal, and as they fling outwards, this collar essentially moves in and out. And that was pushing directly on this fork here, which then fights the main spring to open and close the metering valve to add and reduce fuel. And then on the back of these, there's these rivets, and there's supposed to be a rubber ring here that connects this to the actual hub of it. And they, I guess, have been coming apart with newer diesel and time and whatever. And I expected that the ring would have pieces missing out of it. I didn't expect the ring would be entirely missing and gone, and this thing's broken two pieces. That's probably a pretty extreme case of governor ring failure for the Roosa Master here. Okay, snap ring comes off. Now we can lift this governor plate off. That is comical almost. This is all that's left of the ring, is these three little pieces. The rest of this has been ground up and eaten by the rest of the machine. And this is supposed to fit through like this, and there should be a rubber dampener ring in here controlling all of this. This is out of control. This thing was probably slapping around, and I'm sure with it being totally gone, I mean, you can see actually these rivets are wore halfway through the thickness of the rivet. So this has been running this way for a long time, and probably at some point the governor can even escape from the cage and create unnecessary throttle oscillations and all other kinds of crap. So the solution for that, Standardine does make a new improved cage for this. It's one piece, or it's at least more robust. It's a 2911P. I think they're about $100. And you can see this is kind of all one piece. Doesn't look like there's any dampening in this actually. It's just a plate riveted right to that. So really this could fix our pump at this point. That would be, you know, we could probably stop here, clean things up, put it back together, but we want to inspect the rest of it, make sure that ring didn't go anywhere it wasn't supposed to be. This is the actual pumping cam here, and this is the high pressure side of the pump. So these rollers, depending on what the metering valve dictates, is how far these rollers will come out, and they ride along this cam to create your high pressure fuel. So there's a little leaf spring here. This is actually a leaf spring, and this limits how far out these rollers can come, and they're getting pressurized by the pressure of the casing and the metering valve to determine how far out they're going to come, and that's how you kind of vary the stroke of these pumps and the fuel delivery. So these can be counterclockwise or clockwise, so we'll remember that this one is going to the right. That's the way the arrow is going. I'll probably have to watch the video again because I won't remember that after a few more sodas. And now we're down to the actual pump head here, and this is kind of gross. What actually dictates how much fuel they push is these inner pistons here. And these pistons come out further or less to actually press them rollers out. So they're just like dowel pins. They feel pretty good. I'll send that one all the way through. She fell right out. Good. So they feel good. So if you got one that's real rusty and it won't run at all, sometimes those pistons are just collapsed, just stuck in. They won't actually allow the rollers to come out to pump any fuel. Scoring a line in this because I don't know if this is directional or could go on several ways. So that is the start of it all. That's where your filtered fuel comes in. We got a thrust plate here. And then the simple vane pump that I was telling you about. Nice and simple. Wow, this stays stationary in operation. That's it. Just a standard vane pump, pump and fuel. All right, so if you wanted to go further, there is a snap ring that retains this in 2 half-moon plates that would come out and allow you to push this shaft through and pull this whole assembly out. There's no seals in between there, so there's no reason for me to dig any deeper. So that'll be it. I'm gonna call it a night on this. I wanna soak all these parts in a container of fresh diesel. We'll get everything cleaned up. But what you notice is we got this far. We've got the pump almost fully disassembled and we haven't touched any adjustments yet. So I'm using that in my head to justify that I can replace seals, replace a governor ring, put everything back together, and not need to send this to a pump shop for calibration. That's the goal, at least. That's just a plug that holds it in. Hopefully this will come out without too much force. Sweet. So that's the spring and the pusher thing. I think there's one more part. There it is. So that's actual delivery valve. So another thing we got to do that's very, very important is transfer our timing mark from the old governor ring to the new one. And luckily, with this thing being broken, we can just piggyback them on top of each other. If you're doing that with a non-broken one, it's probably better to tear it apart and do it this way instead of trying to, this is what you would end up with naturally. So scribing across here would be difficult. But if you can break the thing into 2 pieces like that, line this thing right up. All right, so we got our timing mark here. Can you guys see that? Yeah, you can see it with the light. Timing mark on the cage, or on the rotor, timing mark on the old plate, and then timing mark on the new part. So now when I pull this off, drop this on, we look nice. Now one thing to note for like reassembly is there's a notch up here, and then there's a notch on this, so you know you're getting that right because you could be 180 out on this. 2, my factory one had an IL stamped into it there. I went back in the video and confirmed, but that's how that one comes off. All right, so our head is mostly back together. Now, before we can put this back together though, we need to fix this bushing. You can see there's some pretty heavy scoring in there. We need to drive this out and replace it. Kind of figured that was coming too, so I grabbed another one. These come in 2 different lengths. I called the shop I bought it from, gave them my pump part number. They said this is the right one, so hopefully it is. You'll notice there's a chamfer on one side. That chamfer faces out. This dimension here is apparently critical. I'm not exactly sure why, but further in would be a problem. Further out a little, I don't think would be an issue, but we're gonna set it to that exact height. We need to heat the housing and drive this out. All right, so this boy's sticking out 50 thousandths. Got a piece of aluminum here. I was going to machine it to fit, but it's actually pretty close. It'll go through and it won't mar it up. So we'll use that to knock this thing out. So you can see there's some type of retaining compound in here, so we'll do that on the way in. Anyway, a little blue Loctite, it's better than nothing. It ain't right, but it's a pretty good press fit. I don't expect any issues. Like I said, this is not a DIY channel. It's for entertainment only. Well, that shot through a little more aggressively than expected. That makes me kind of worry about it. Doesn't actually fit that tight. Just going to use the Bridgeport to press it back in, but that may be a non-issue. We'll see how this feels once it cools down. We'll do the remainder of our press once that cools, so I can be confident that this feels pretty good. If it doesn't, I'll push it out and we'll get some bearing retainer tomorrow night and try again. So while we're waiting for that to cool, I figured I'd show you this factory weight retainer. This is the ring that's supposed to hold it all together. And you stretch this over each rivet and it offers that dampening effect. But it seems like over time, and maybe with different fuels we have now, and especially machines that have been sitting a while, this piece just doesn't hold up. It's taking some force now. Uh-oh. All right, that Loctite's already setting up. Let's not play around too long here. 93 thousandths, we gotta go about 40 thou more. Now, if I was thinking, I would have just set the depth on the Bridgeport to the stock bushing and then just whacked it into that point, but we ain't always thinking. $51. 52, we're gonna leave it there, not risk it. All right, so for demonstration purposes for you guys, I cut this factory bushing in half. I don't know how much you can see, but listen. This thing saw a lot of action. I don't know what was spinning around in here, potentially pieces of that governor cage bushing or whatever, but being that this unit had symptoms of putting oil in the fuel, this was something I wanted to investigate, and I'm sure glad we did. There's some pretty serious grooving in here. Whether that would cause a leak or not, don't know for sure, but it certainly ain't helping. So glad we've replaced that. It's gonna be a real O-ring roller here. There's a couple things gotta go right for this to go right. Don't want any weights falling out. And gotta make sure this O-ring's good, and we gotta make sure everything's clocked right so we can get the bolts back in, and make sure the cam ring's in the right position so we can get the ball joint back in the bottom. Pretty exciting. And the governor thing's gotta be in the right orientation too. All right, that felt pretty good. I'm feeling confident there. Confidence. Okay. Also, if you go too far, like if you have these bolts out and you go too far, the O-ring will slide over a lip inside and probably tear itself up. So you get one shot to do it. But since I didn't pull these out, I don't think I could go too far accidentally. Awesome. Starting to look like a pump again. All right, well, our pump is back together. I kind of second-guessed myself a little bit, took a couple things back apart, went back together again, just to make sure I didn't find anything wrong. You do need a nice inch torque wrench to do this because a lot of this stuff is really low torque. Like these are like 20 to 30 inch-pounds. You don't want to go wild on them. One thing I want to try before we put this back together I want to be able to check this dynamic timing when it's running to make sure we're in the ballpark. And they used to make a clear cover window that you can bolt on to your timing window, run the engine at full load, and then observe the cam rotate. And the timing window had degrees on it, markings, so you could see, okay, you know, it sits here with the engine off, and then once we're running, it advances here, and then once we hit full RPM, full load, it advances here. Well, those are no longer available, unfortunately. So I'm thinking an alternative would be if I measure the diameter of the cam, which is the same as the gov cage, 2.71, divide that by 360 degrees, figure out what the actual distance is along the circumference of, say, whatever the timing this thing's rated at, 6 or 8 degrees or whatever, and then I can measure in here and make a mark in the case at that degree. And then when we get to run this, assuming it runs, I'll bolt on a little clear cover, like a piece of Lexan or whatever, and then we can look in here at an angle with a flashlight and see if that cam is reaching our advance point. Now, it doesn't need to be perfect. I'm not worried about that, but I want to know, all right, it is advancing the full 8 degrees versus just 2 degrees or whatever. And without having a reference of what 8 degrees looks like, I don't know. All right, so JDB 331 in this application should see a total advance of 8 plus or minus a half, so 7.5 to 8.5 degrees of advance. So 8 degrees comes out to 0.189 inches. So we'll set my caliper about 189. That should be about 8. And then I will carefully scribe in here what that looks like. Maybe I'll go over it with a black Sharpie and hope that we get to look at it before the fuel washes it away. Not sure if you guys can see it or not, but basically I scored a line at 0 degrees. I scored it just real lightly here for visual reference, and then it extends into the housing a little, and then same with the 8 degree mark up here. So according to the manual, this thing should be idling around 4 degrees. So we should see this cam advance to around here when that case pressure is at idle, and then when you load it up high idle, we should see it closer to the other line. Doesn't need to be perfect. This is not a pump calibration. It's just to make sure fundamentally it's working and it's in the ballpark. These old motors aren't going to care about a degree or two. I mean, they might, but I don't care about a degree or two. All right, so I made this polycarbonate window for the side of the pump, and then I took the old gasket and cut the center out, and now we can bolt this onto the side and observe where those timing marks are in real time. All right, so you can see through there, and you can see the timing marks, and then I've got a mark on the cover here as well as inside the housing where that 8 degree number is, and we'll be looking for something close. This is not a precision calibration. Anyway, these seals are directional, so one of them faces the engine, the other one faces the pump. Now on a John Deere, I believe you could get away with them both facing the pump because there is no pressurized oil up here. There's just a little bit of residue that may sling off the gears, but there's nothing forcing oil into the pump. So if you wanted double protection from fuel going in the crankcase, you can probably flip them. I am not experienced enough with these to know for sure though, so I'm gonna play it safe and do it the way it came from the factory. Oh boy. You really gotta stretch these babies. They feel fragile. There's one. You also have to be really careful putting the pump onto these. There is a special tool, which I don't have. I wish I did, but basically you got to compress this seal and get it in there right, because if you flip the seal by accident, rolling the pump on, then you're definitely going to fill the crankcase with oil. Put this one on inside out, and then we'll flip it now that it's in its groove. Mostly in its groove. Come on, baby. There we go. Just cleaning up the threads on these studs right now because I want this to go on by finger so I don't have to spend 3 hours turking this on 1/8 of a turn at a time. So do that now before the pump's in, because you can't get to that stud once the pump's in there. And it really depends on the model, because I was looking at the backhoe, it'd be pretty easy to get the pump off, but the way this dozer frame rail lays, man, it's tricky. So the one thing that doesn't come in these rebuild kits for whatever reason is the O-ring for this. So you gotta buy it separate. T19854. Like that. Got a big moment incoming here. See how difficult it's going to be to roll this seal in without the tool. Alright, I got it. That wasn't too bad. You'll kind of know, you can kind of rub it in and out and feel if it's flipped or not, and I can see that it's doming the right way, so we're good there. The next seal should just roll right in, no problem. And then send the gear up, send her in. Just like that. I hate these things. I tightened down the top bolt only after we've got our timing set, which you guys probably aren't going to be able to see, but I can see that the governor cage and the cam are lined up. Our engine is still at top dead center with the timing pin back there. So we'll leave that bottom bolt just finger tight for now. Once we're happy with our pump timing, then we'll go ahead and torque it down. Well guys, I know this video is getting kind of long, so I'm going to wrap it up here with just finishing and installing the injection pump. I ended up pulling the injectors out to do some checking there, and I found something pretty concerning, and it's going to turn into its whole nother episode, so check back next time for that one. But anyway, hope you like what you saw here with the injection pump rebuild. It's my first time doing it. I'm sure I didn't do everything right. It's not how to do it, but maybe you guys can learn something from what I did. So anyway, let me know what you guys think about this down in the comments. I'll see you next time on Spank Ranch Garage.